February 18, 1943. Stalingrad. One Soviet sergeant. One crude submachine gun that German engineers mocked as a wooden toy. 90 seconds later, 17 enemy soldiers lay dead, and Nazi infantry doctrine was rewritten forever. This is the story of how desperation, brutal mathematics, and the most mass-produced weapon in history turned the Eastern Front into a German nightmare. Rewind to autumn 1941. Operation Barbarossa had just crashed into the Soviet Union like a freight train, and the Red Army was facing total annihilation. The equipment gap was catastrophic. German infantry carried M40 submachine guns, beautifully machined, folding stock, manufactured in precision facilities producing 12,000 units per month. Meanwhile, Soviet forces were stuck with P.D-40s from the Finnish War, complex weapons requiring 80 hours of machining per unit, chambered in ammunition that was already running out. By December 1941, the numbers told a horror story. 2.6 million Soviet soldiers lost, 20,000 tanks destroyed, and most critically, the entire Western industrial base captured or destroyed. Stalin's armament commissar delivered the devastating report. Submachine gun production had collapsed to 3,000 per month, against German forces fielding 500,000 automatic weapons. Soviet infantry were charging German machine gun positions with bolt-action Mosin-Nagant rifles designed in 1891. Entire battalions were being cut down in minutes. The Soviet Union was losing the war not just tactically, but industrially. Then one weapons designer saw something nobody else did. Georgy Shpagin wasn't thinking about elegant engineering or precision tolerances. He was thinking about one thing: speed. While Western engineers obsessed over barrel harmonics and mechanical perfection, Shpagin understood that total war required different mathematics. He designed the PPSh-41, Pistolet Pulemyot Shpagati, around a revolutionary concept: manufacture speed over mechanical elegance. The receiver? Stamped from a single sheet of steel in 22 minutes. The barrel? Chrome-lined for durability, but roughly finished. The 71-round drum magazine? Crude, prone to jamming. Soldiers nicknamed it the dinner plate. The wooden stock? Whatever timber was available: birch, beech, pine, even plywood. When German weapons inspectors examined captured PPSh-40s, they reported back to Berlin that Soviet manufacturing had devolved to peasant blacksmith quality. They completely missed the genius. Manufacturing time per unit 7 hours, compared to the M40's 80 hours. By spring 1942, Soviet factories evacuated to the Urals were producing 6 million PPSh-40s annually. Stalin's order was explicit: every squad gets 2 PPSh gunners. By 1943, entire Red Army battalions carried nothing but PPSh-40s and grenades. German intelligence started calling them storm battalions. But here's where the crude design revealed its brutal effectiveness. The PPSh-41 fired 7.62 by 25mm Tokarev rounds at 900 rounds per minute, versus the MP40's 550 rounds per minute. At close range, under 50 meters, that difference was apocalyptic. The Tokarev cartridge produced 1,430 feet per second muzzle velocity compared to the M40's 1250 FPS. More velocity meant better penetration, but more critically, that insane rate of fire meant a single PPSh gunner could output more firepower than an entire German rifle squad. German soldiers started hearing that specific mechanical howl echoing through bombed-out buildings. They nicknamed it different things: the typewriter, the mandolin, Stalin's chainsaw. What they really meant was the sound of losing. Because while the MP40 was objectively better engineered, tighter tolerances, superior accuracy, better ergonomics, Germany couldn't produce enough to matter. By 1943, German squads had 1 or 2 M40s. Soviet squads had 4 to 6 PPSh-40s. That numerical disparity, multiplied across millions of engagements, was deciding the Eastern Front. Not strategic brilliance, not superior tactics, just brutal industrial mathematics. Before we see how this played out in the deadliest battle of the war, quick question: should I cover more Eastern Front weapons, the SVT-40 rifle, the DP-28 machine gun? Drop a comment and hit subscribe, because Thursday's story about the Mosin-Nagant sniper who held a factory for 11 days with frozen ammunition is absolutely insane. This brings us to Stalingrad, February 1943, the final month of the siege that had already consumed 1.1 million casualties. Mamayev Kurgan Hill, 102 on Soviet military maps, was a strategic height overlooking the Volga River. It had changed hands 14 times in 4 months. The summit was a moonscape of shell craters, burned-out tanks, and frozen destruction. Soviet 62nd Army Commander Vasily Chuikov had issued a controversial doctrine: hug the enemy, keep front lines within 50 meters of German positions, negate their artillery advantage, negate their air support. At that range, the weapon that mattered wasn't the rifle or the machine gun, it was the submachine gun, and the PPSh-41 dominated that deadly geometry. Enter Senior Sergeant Nikolai Petrovich Kuznetsov, 31 years old. Textile factory foreman from Ivanovo who'd received 8 weeks of military training before Stalingrad. He commanded a 10-man reconnaissance squad tasked with impossible missions, probing German lines, intelligence gathering, sabotage raids. His PPSh-41 was manufactured in December 1942 at the Sestroretsk Arms Factory. It bore no serial number. Wartime production had abandoned such niceties. The wooden stock was mismatched. The drum magazine had feeding issues that required a specific loading technique. The barrel showed wear from excessive firing. German soldiers would have discarded it as defective. Kuznetsov had personally accounted for 43 enemy soldiers with that specific weapon. He trusted it more than any piece of equipment in his inventory. February 18th, mission brief. Locate German artillery observers directing fire onto Soviet supply routes crossing the frozen Volga. Intelligence reported an observation post somewhere on Mamayev-Kurdin's western slope. Kuznetsov's squad moved at 0400 hours, minus 32 degrees Celsius. They navigated by memory through ruins they'd fought over 6 times before. At 0520, they stumbled into something unexpected. Not the observation post, but a German forward aid station treating wounded from the previous day's fighting. Standard protocol dictated immediate withdrawal and reporting. But Kuznetsov noticed something that changed his tactical calculation. Through the shattered factory wall, he could see that captured Soviet wounded weren't being treated as prisoners. The SS security element was handling the situation in a way that violated every convention of warfare. The tactical math was suicidal. He had 9 men, 71 rounds in his PPSh drum magazine, plus 2 35-round box magazines. The Germans numbered approximately 15 medical personnel, walking wounded, and critically, a 4-man security element with MP-40s. His second-in-command, Corporal Dmitry Orlov, whispered the obvious: "We report and withdraw." Kuznetsov's squad had frozen rifle bolts. Mosin Nagants required meticulous maintenance in extreme cold, or the firing pins froze solid. Only the PPSh-41s remained functional. Their simpler gas blowback system and chrome-lined barrels resisting temperature effects. 3 functional submachine guns versus 15 entrenched Germans. Kuznetsov clicked the PPSh selector to full automatic. What happened next was documented in both Soviet after-action reports and German 6th Army intelligence assessments. Kuznetsov charged from 40 meters while his squad provided covering fire with grenades. The PPSh-41's 900 round per minute cyclic rate meant his 71-round drum would empty in 4.7 seconds of continuous fire. But Kuznetsov didn't fire continuously. He'd learned through 53 prior engagements that the PPSh's effective technique was controlled bursts, 3 to 5 rounds, acquire next target. Fire again. At 40 meters, 7.62 by 25 millimeter rounds punched through Wehrmacht winter coats with devastating effect. The first burst dropped the security element's squad leader mid-turn. Second burst caught 2 personnel reaching for holstered weapons. Kuznetsov was sprinting now, closing distance, the tactical geometry shifting with every meter. At 30 meters, German return fire began. MP-40 bursts wild panic shooting. An SS Sturman fired 18 rounds in the wrong direction, hitting his own comrade in crossfire. At 20 meters, Kuznetsov dove behind a wrecked Opel Blitz truck. He ejected the drum magazine, 15 rounds remaining, feeding failures, and slapped in a 35-round box magazine. The box magazines were more reliable, narrower profile, faster reloads. Soviet troops called them death sticks. He vaulted the truck hood and engaged 3 Germans attempting to flank. The PPSh's muzzle blast at 5 meters was disorienting, flash blinding in dawn twilight. Soldiers described the sound as ripping canvas. The cyclic rate so high individual shots blurred into a mechanical howl. Kuznetsov's technique was surgical despite the chaos. Controlled bursts, never more than 5 rounds. Target acquisition purely instinctive. 60 seconds elapsed. His second magazine ran dry. 35 rounds expended. He dropped behind rubble, reloading his final magazine, expecting counterattack. None came. The position had gone silent except for wounded Germans calling for help. Orlov's squad rushed forward, clearing the area with grenades and bayonets. Final count: 17 enemy casualties. Soviet losses? None. Ammunition expended by Kuznetsov personally: 91 rounds. German after-action reports from survivors described heavy automatic weapons fire from multiple positions. They refused to believe a single submachine gun could produce that volume of fire. But the tactical impact transcended the body count. German infantry in Stalingrad had developed doctrine assuming Soviet forces lacked automatic weapons density. M40-equipped squads could suppress and maneuver against bolt-action rifles. The PPSh-41 invalidated that entire calculus. A single PPSh gunner with adequate ammunition could dominate the close-quarters geometry that Stalingrad demanded. At 50 meters maximum, often closer to 10, the PPSh's rate of fire and magazine capacity created localized fire superiority that made traditional German infantry tactics irrelevant. Wehrmacht assessments from Stalingrad consistently noted, enemy submachine gun saturation prevents standard infantry maneuvers. Yet German propaganda continued mocking the PPSh-41 as crude. Technical manuals described it as cheap, disposable, inaccurate beyond 30 meters. All true. Also completely irrelevant. The PPSh wasn't designed for 100-meter precision shooting. It was designed for combat across bombed rooms, collapsed corridors, and shell craters. At those ranges, rate of fire mattered more than accuracy. Magazine capacity mattered more than craftsmanship. And critically, manufacturability mattered more than individual weapon quality. The Soviet Union produced 6 million PPSh-40s during the war. Germany produced 1 million M40s. When one side can lose 3 weapons for every enemy loss and still increase numerical advantage, the battlefield mathematics become inevitable. Kuznetsov survived Mamayev-Kugan, but was killed 6 weeks later at the Kursk salient by artillery, the weapon responsible for 70% of Eastern Front casualties, rendering infantry small arms debates somewhat academic. His PPSh-41 was recovered and reissued 4 times before being destroyed in combat near Minsk in 1944. But the weapon's legacy transcends any single story. It proved that in industrial warfare, adequate equipment manufactured at scale defeats superior equipment manufactured scarcely. The MP40 was objectively better engineered. Tighter tolerances, superior accuracy, better ergonomics. It lost because Germany couldn't produce enough. That numerical disparity, multiplied across millions of infantry engagements, decided the Eastern Front more than any single battle. Stalingrad was won with PPSh-40s and grenades in basements and sewers, not with strategic brilliance at operational headquarters. Modern weapons procurement still grapples with this lesson. The M4 carbine versus the AK-47, the F-35 versus the F-16. Exquisite capability versus producible adequacy. The PPSh-41 embodied the Soviet answer: build enough adequate weapons to overwhelm the enemy's excellent weapons through sheer numerical density. That philosophy didn't just apply to submachine guns. It defined T-34 tanks, Katyusha rockets, even Soviet tactical doctrine itself. Accept limitations, exploit industrial capacity, replace losses faster than the enemy can inflict them. It's brutal mathematics. It's also why the Soviet Union crushed Germany's army despite starting the war with catastrophic defeats. The weapon itself was crude. Stamped metal that warped in heat, wooden stocks that cracked in cold, drum magazines that jammed if loaded incorrectly. Soviet troops complained constantly. The PPSh was heavy, the selector switch was stiff, the sights barely worked. But when German infantry heard that specific mechanical howl echoing through Stalingrad's ruins, they recognized it as the sound of losing the war. Not because the PPSh was a super weapon, because there were 6 million of them, wielded by soldiers who'd learned that closing distance and overwhelming fire was the only tactic that worked when facing annihilation. Sometimes desperation and a crude weapon beat precision and a perfect one. That's not military theory. That's Stalingrad's lesson, written in blood and stamped steel over 900 days of brutal urban combat. If this story gripped you, you need to hear about the Mohsen Nagant sniper who held the Red October factory for 11 days. 1 rifle, 207 confirmed kills, and ammunition so frozen he had to thaw cartridges in his mouth before loading. That story drops Thursday. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And comment below, which Eastern Front weapon should I cover next? Drop your vote now.